We are coming on the air right now with breaking news out of the Middle East. Iranian state TV says they've launched missiles on U.S. bases overseas. We know the president right now is closely monitoring the situation from the White House. He's set to meet with members of his national security team in the Situation Room. And we've already seen reports of explosions near Doha and Qatar. This comes after the U.S., of course, conducted strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear sites over the weekend. I want to get right to NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel in Tel Aviv. Richard, this was expected. It was unclear when it was going to happen, but it appears for right now Iran is retaliating.
It was expected, but it was never clear where a strike like this would come. And according to Iranian state media and what witnesses are seeing over Doha, that Iran has fired missiles at the Al-Udeid military base. It's an air base in Kuwait. According to the Iranians, a statement from the military, 6 missiles were launched at Al-Udeid, and witnesses have seen explosions that look like interceptions in the air over Doha. There are also reports of air raid sirens going off in Bahrain and in Kuwait, where there are also U.S. military facilities. The Qatari government, just before this announcement from Iran and just before explosions were seen in the sky, took the extraordinary step of closing their airspaces, and U.S. nationals and British nationals were told to shelter in place. All of that in just the hours right before this apparent Iranian attack.
And then, Richard, we should explain to our viewers, it's unclear what we know at this hour. We are just basically reporting out what we've seen, what we heard, what we believe to be true at this hour right now. The information is still very fluid, but these retaliation strikes have caused injuries before to our American service members. And I'll remind viewers, after the U.S. took out Soleimani, that Iranian commander, Richard, remind our viewers there was that ballistic missile strike on an air base in Iraq that caused so many injuries.
So I was on that base shortly after the strike, and after President Trump, during his first administration, killed a top Iranian commander, Qasem Soleimani, who was one of their most notorious, most skilled operators, who had been held responsible for many attacks against the U.S., many attacks against Israel. He was really at the tip of the spear of Iranian special military operations. After President Trump orders his assassination by a drone strike in Iraq, the Iranians responded. They fired, again, ballistic missiles. They hit the Al-Assad base, which is in Iraq, and there were more than 100 injuries. I arrived on the base shortly afterwards, and there were no one was killed in that attack, and President Trump almost ordered a response at the time, but since no one was killed, he pulled back. But I can tell you it was a very close call. There were quite a few soldiers who had a traumatic brain injury because of the shock wave. The ballistic missile almost hit a mess hall. Several people only survived because of where they happened to have been standing, and had they been a few feet in other places, they could have lost their lives. In this case, what we know is based on what we've seen. We've seen images of explosions in the sky over Doha. The Qataris have closed the airspace, and the Iranians say they fired these 6 ballistic missiles at the Al-Udeid base in Qatar, which is the largest U.S. military installation in the entire Middle East, generally housing about 8,000 troops. It is a massive facility.
We should also mention, just geographically speaking, these countries that have now been targeted, that we believe have been targeted by Iran, are much closer than Israel, so those missiles can get there at a much faster pace. I do want to go to Gabe Gutierrez, who's monitoring everything from the White House. Gabe, the last information we got is that President Trump is monitoring this inside the Situation Room. What else do we know?
Yes, Tom, there's a lot of activity here at the White House. And just a few moments ago, I spoke with a senior White House official who did tell me the president was in the Situation Room, along with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and also Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, along with other officials watching this all unfold. Now, as you were saying, it's still very early in this potential attack, but White House officials are watching this. Now, the president was supposed to have a meeting with his national security staff in in the Oval Office. A little unusual. Usually that happens in the White House Situation Room. That was supposed to happen at 1 o'clock. As we understand it, though, the president is still in the Situation Room right now. The senior White House official that I spoke with could not confirm any details of any possible explosions in Qatar. But again, it is still very early. Now, Tom, we should mention that over the last several days and yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security issued a new bulletin, not just concerning Americans abroad, but also Americans here inside the United States, warning of a heightened threat environment. And we also know that according to NBC News reporting, two U.S. officials as well as another person familiar with the matter, that President Trump was warned through an intermediary during his trip to the G7 summit in Canada that if the U.S. were to conduct an airstrike against Iran, that Iran could retaliate by activating sleeper cells within the United States for a potential terrorist attack. Again, that's according to two U.S. officials, that warning coming last week. But as for the latest in this attack, and yes, Tom, I'll send it back to you.
Just stand by for us for a second. We are getting new video in. You can see it on the left hand of your screen there. I'm going to ask the control room to tell me what we're looking at here so our viewers understand what we're looking at. This is Qatar. This is Doha. The skies over Doha earlier tonight. You can see what looks like those flashes in the air. They seem to be coming down. Unclear at this point if those are indeed the missiles being fired from Iran and then the air defense systems intercepting them. We'll know more in the coming minutes. Iran's armed forces has just put out a statement saying they've targeted the Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar there with a devastating and powerful missile attack. These might be some of those missiles either intercepted in the air or as they're coming down. We're going to learn about that shortly. We're also going to check in with our Courtney Cuby soon, who's getting up live for us at the Pentagon. Gabe, while I have you, remind our viewers, what did President Trump say in the hours and days after that strike on Saturday night on the nuclear sites in Iran? If Iran were to retaliate, what has President Trump promised?
Well, President Trump, along with administration officials, have promised overwhelming force if Iran were to retaliate against the United States. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also happens to be the interim national security advisor, he warned Iran against this. So did the Vice President, J.D. Vance. We'll have to see the extent of this attack, Tom, and whether the U.S. makes the calculation that some sort of escalation is warranted. It is too early to tell, of course. Again, according to a senior White House official, the president monitoring all this from the Situation Room. And this is certainly some of what he will have to weigh. What type of retaliatory response does he escalate this somehow, depending on the extent of the attack and whether there are injuries, potential injuries to American forces or not? But President Trump had warned Iran not to do this. The Iranians obviously feeling that they were forced into some sort of retaliatory response after those U.S. airstrikes. Now, Tom, I should mention, we have not seen the president on camera since late Saturday evening when he announced those U.S. airstrikes. We have heard from him, though, several times as he's posted on social media. Late yesterday, he did float the idea of potential regime change in Iran. Now, administration officials have been very clear that that is not the military posture of the United States. Just this morning, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt reiterated that, said that the U.S. was not calling for regime change in Iran, but if Iranians were to see what was unfolding and want to overtake their government, that's how regime change would be possible. Still, in the region, it's being seen as very inflammatory language. The president even mentioning the possibility of regime change. The president also saying that there was monumental damage done via those airstrikes in Iran. We're still getting a full assessment of that. But again, we're waiting to hear the latest here from the White House on these latest strikes as the president monitors this
Gabe, stand by for us. I want to go to some new reporting that Keir Simmons, our chief international correspondent, has. He's in Erbil, Iraq tonight, and he has some new reporting on what's happened in Qatar tonight. And, you know, the Al-Udeid Air Base, Keir, as you know, it's our largest air base, military installation in the Middle East. Iran has said they're fired missiles at it. What do you know?
Yeah, Tom, I'll just tell you where we are right now. We're in Iraq, in northern Iraq. Behind me is a U.S. base. We have not seen any strikes on that base yet. There have been reports that another base in Anbar province here in Iraq is being targeted. But, Tom, I've been communicating with a Gulf diplomat who tells me, and this was, I'm going to tell you, I think around about 10, 15 minutes ago, that at that stage, the base in Qatar had not been hit. There are reports that there haven't been casualties, but that was what I was told 15 minutes ago. But we now have a statement from Qatar about this attack, and I'm going to read some of it to you, Tom. The state of Qatar strongly condemns the attack that targeted the base by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. We consider this a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the state of Qatar, its airspace, international law, and the United Nations Charter. We affirm that Qatar reserves the right to respond directly in a manner equivalent with the nature and scale of this brazen aggression in line with international law. We reassure that Qatar's air defences successfully thwarted the attack and intercepted the Iranian missiles. So that statement, I'm just reading this myself, Tom, so that statement confirming what I was told a short while ago by a Gulf diplomat, that in fact the Qataris believe that they managed to prevent this attack from hitting its target. A detailed statement, reading now on from the statement from Qatar, a detailed statement regarding the circumstances of the attack will be issued by the Ministry of Defence. We also emphasise that the continuation of such escalatory military actions will undermine security and stability in the region, dragging it into situations that could have catastrophic consequences for international peace and security. The statement goes on, Tom, but that is the Qataris responding very quickly. And just again, the headlines from that, they are saying that these missiles did not hit, that we're going to find out how they managed to deflect them, how they managed to prevent that from happening. And I would just say, too, you'll remember, Tom, that the Qataris have been closer to the Iranians than other Gulf nations. They have been trying to mediate, and yet it was Qatar that first closed its airspace, and their first reports of missiles heading towards the Gulf came from Qatar. So we'll have to unpick in the hours ahead exactly why that is the case. Again, Tom, we are in Iraq, in northern Iraq.
Yes.
That is a U.S. base behind us. So far, we have not seen any strikes on that base.
Yeah, the blinking lights we see there in the distance. Keir, we appreciate your reporting. Please stand by. We have new video that we've been showing you on the left hand of your screen that's been coming in from Doha tonight. You can see the missiles in the air and either the air defense systems intercepting them or those missiles trying to punch through, trying to land at the Al-Udeid Air Base there in Qatar. Richard Engel has new reporting just in from Iran. Richard, what do you know?
So the Ministry of Defense in Doha says that the incoming missiles were shot down, that there were no injuries, and there's just been a new statement from what is being described as the Supreme National Security Committee in Iran, saying that a successful missile barrage was launched against Al-Udeid Air Base, and that the same number of missiles were launched as the U.S. fired at Iran. So the Iranians linking this attack directly to what the U.S. did to attack those 3 nuclear sites. But again, both from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar and the Ministry of Defense, statements saying that there was a barrage, that it was unsuccessful, that it was shot down by Qatari missile defense systems, and that there were no casualties.
Okay, Richard, I want you to stand by for us, and I want to tell our viewers we are jumping around kind of fast because a lot is happening at this hour. I want to go back to Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, I know you've just gotten an update directly from the White House. What are you hearing?
That's right. Well, the president is still in the Situation Room, Tom, but as I was earlier saying that he was monitoring the situation in Qatar, we're also now learning that the president also monitoring imminent threats in Iraq and Bahrain. Again, not just Qatar, but 3 separate countries where U.S. forces are stationed. The president and his national security team, including the Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, monitoring not just Qatar, but also what the White House refers to as imminent threats in Iraq and Bahrain. We have no further information other than that, but certainly this is something that the administration watching very closely throughout the region, Tom.
As we've mentioned, Al-Udeid is the largest military installation that we have in the Middle East. I want to bring in Courtney Kuby. She's reporting live for us tonight from the Pentagon, today, I should say. So, Courtney, my first question to you, walk our viewers through why this air base, this military installation is so important to us, and what you think they've done to sort of protect our brave men and women who are serving there.
Yeah, so Tom, as you mentioned, it's the largest base. It's enormous, frankly, the sprawling base out in the middle of the desert. But there are about 5,000 Americans who are there at any given time. There are a number of different air wings there, but it has played a critical role in the region for the last 2 decades plus. That is because U.S. military jets, fighter aircraft, surveillance aircraft, all kinds of different aircraft were coming and going out of there during the war on terror. They were flying out of there largely into Iraq, but into other locations as well. It's not just that, though. They continue to play a role right now, whether it's surveillance, whether it's, support to other nations, whatever it is. That base has been very active. It is also the headquarters for all air operations in the entire region. There's a location there known as the CAOC. It's the Combined Air Operations Center, and it basically is this watch floor, this hub, where all air operations for the entire region are run. Candidly, the reality is the operations that occurred the other night, they were extremely, covert. They were B-2s that flew out of the U.S., but they would most certainly have been monitored by that CAOC at Doha, at Al-Udeid. It's also known as the forward headquarters for U.S. Central Command. So the main headquarters is down in Tampa, Florida, but the forward headquarters is there. It is a very important base, and it is one that the U.S., again, has been operating out of for some time. Now, we are speaking to defense officials. They are looking into these continued, the video that you just showed that appears to be air defense systems employed there. At Al-Udeid, they have a very robust air defense system, frankly, because of all of the activity in the region over years and because U.S. aircraft have been flying out of there into, at times, dangerous and enemy airspace. They have an extremely strong air defense system that includes Patriots. Now, those have the ability to shoot down missiles. The Qataris also have their own air defense systems. Obviously, they're in the country. But another thing to keep in mind, Tom, Al-Udeid is actually a Qatari base. It is owned by the government there. The U.S. military operates out of there, but it is not actually a U.S. installation, Tom.
All right, Courtney Kuby, stand by for us there as well. I'm going to ask our control room if they can give us a bigger map of the region to sort of show where that military installation is right now in Qatar. I want to bring in retired U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey. Barry, we just heard from Courtney there about the air defense systems that we have, but again, our brave men and women are on this base right now. They are so close to Iran, just across from the Persian Gulf. We're not going to call them sitting ducks, right, because we have those air defense systems, but walk us through what those brave men and women are going through right now, the air sirens that may be going off, and the defensive posturing they may be taking right now as they come under attack from Iran.
Well, these are an expected outcome at a sort of a minimum for the Iranians to respond to the U.S. attack on the 3 nuclear sites. Giant cluster of U.S. naval power in the region, 2 carrier battle groups, 20,000 sailors at sea. Bahrain is really their command, control, and maintenance spot. That may have been under attack. Al-Udeid, as Courtney explained, a major asset for the United States in terms of CENTCOM forward headquarters is really there, but it's also command and control of air power in the region. And finally, Kuwait, we still have a continuing ability to put ground combat forces into Kuwait, fallen and pre-positioned equipment. So it looks as if possibly the Iranians are going to strike all 3. Hopefully, it will be largely ineffective. Hopefully, it will satisfy their need to say they did something, and we can pursue a course of action to get back to the negotiating table and get arms control inspectors on the ground.
All right, Barry, stand by for us. I want to go back to Richard Engel. Richard, walk us through. You've been on so many of these bases right now, and you can just imagine what our troops are going through right now as Iran launches this retaliatory strike right now, ballistic missiles potentially. It looks like so far Qatar has been able to intercept a lot of those missiles, but you never know. Even in the Iron Dome, sometimes they miss missiles. What's happening right now on the base, do you think?
We're hearing that things are quite calm in Doha right now. This base is outside of Doha, but people are back on the streets. This was a relatively short barrage, and according to the Ministry of Defense in Doha, it was successfully destroyed. No casualties, no indication at this point that it is an ongoing event. So, as Barry McCaffrey was saying, General Barry McCaffrey, perhaps this is over for the time being. Perhaps this was Iran's response, firing at a very hard target that would be difficult to penetrate. And the U.S. appears to have had some advance warning. Tom, just yesterday we were talking on Nightly News about how U.S. officials, two of them, telling NBC News that they were particularly concerned about this first 48-hour window after the Americans attacked those two sites. Earlier in the day, an order went out for all Americans and British nationals in Qatar to shelter into place. Shortly before the missiles started flying, the airspace of Qatar was closed. So there were precautions. It seems that they may have seen this coming, had some intelligence indicating that this was on its way. And then, according to Iran, at least 6 missiles sent from Iran in what it's describing as a joint operation between the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard. They're describing it as a powerful and devastating attack. Qatar saying just the opposite, that everything was shot down.
Okay, Richard, stand by for us. We're going to go back to Keir, who again is reporting from Erbil, Iraq. Just in the distance there, in those blinking lights, the Al-Udeid base is behind him. Keir, I know you have some new reporting out of Bahrain. What are you hearing?
Hey, Tom, so this is a separate base from Al-Udeid behind me there. This is the Erbil base. It's still, though, a U.S. base, probably the closest base to Iran. So we are watching closely, as you can imagine, to see if any munitions land here. But let me just give you a little bit of news. I've heard from another senior Gulf diplomat who has told me, and this was a communication just a few minutes ago, who's told me that there have been no strikes in Bahrain at this stage. Bahrain has not seen anything hit so far. Meanwhile, we are hearing from Iran's National Security Council. It has put out a statement about the attack on Qatar. We were talking earlier, Tom, about how Qatar has been trying to mediate with the Iranians, that they are perhaps closer to the Iranians than some other Gulf countries. The Iran's National Security Council saying our attack on Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar does not threaten the sisterly state of Qatar. And then Iran's Revolutionary Guard putting out a statement saying our response sent a clear message to the White House. So the Iranians trying to say that they have targeted a U.S. base in Qatar, not Qatar the country, and that it's a message for the White House. I'm not sure the Qataris will see the distinction necessarily reading their statement that they just released, Tom.
Yeah, no, I hear you there, Keir. I do want to bring in Jeremy Bash. Now, Jeremy, I'm sure you heard Keir's reporting there. How do you interpret sort of the statements coming out of Iran tonight? And what do you think President Trump does next?
Well, Iran has a domestic audience. They want to show their own people that they're responding to Operation Midnight Hammer, which was the Trump administration's attack on 3 nuclear sites over the weekend. I think if no U.S. forces are injured and we intercepted all of the incoming missiles, either at Qatar or in other locations, then I think President Trump has a tough decision on his hands. He can kind of step back and say, look, we don't want to have a back and forth. We want to get to the negotiating table. You didn't hurt any of our people. Let's talk. Or he could use military force to go after other targets, other ballistic missile targets inside Iran. He could even go a step farther and target regime targets, target the supreme leader, target defense leaders. He could kind of not waste the crisis and say, hey, you attacked us. I told you not to. You crossed a red line. We're going hard into your country. So I think the president and his team are obviously calibrating this at this hour. A lot is going to depend on what the battle damage assessment is with respect to how much damage these incoming rocket, artillery, and mortar pieces did at U.S. bases, not just at Al-Udeid, but potentially in Iraq, potentially in Bahrain, potentially in Kuwait, and potentially in the UAE. We've got forces all over the region. And just because Iran fired here tonight and they said, you know, this was successful, doesn't mean we can relax. Our force posture is going to be very aggressive. We're going to watch this. And probably there are going to be private messages sent between us and Iran through European powers, through other powers, to basically say, knock it off. If you do this again and you hurt any of our people, this is what the U.S. would say to Iran, we're going to go after you hard.
40,000 U.S. troops in the region there. Jeremy, I do also want to remind our viewers that NBC News had reported that Iran had threatened a terror attack on the homeland here in the U.S. while the president was at the G7 summit in Canada now. And the U.S. obviously can't sort of stop with that defensive posture here in the U.S. as well, because that is another potential, a lone wolf attack or a sleeper cell that pops up.
That's right. And as you know, Tom, U.S. officials have been targeted for assassination by Iranian agents after the U.S. killed off the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps leader Qasem Soleimani in 2019. Several U.S. officials involved in that, including military and diplomatic leaders, were specifically targeted by Iran. Iran has the capability to unleash terrorism, unleash Hezbollah or other Shia militia groups as they reconstitute, not just against U.S. forces in the region, but also against American diplomatic facilities, against maybe American businesses, other American enterprises. And here in the homeland, obviously, we have to be concerned about small teams, teams of assassins, teams, sleeper cells, teams of terrorists who have made their way into the country. They don't have to be Iranian. These could be teams that Iran has paid. They could be even criminal gangs, people making make money off of kind of terror for hire operations. And we've already seen several threats, terrorist attacks against Jewish organizations, against embassy staff here in Washington. There was a shooting a few weeks ago of 2 Israeli embassy staff. And so the threat landscape in the United States is very, very dangerous at this hour.
Okay, Jeremy, you stand by for us. I'm going to go back to Gabe at the White House. Gabe, I know you just got an update.
Hi there, Tom. Well, the president's still monitoring all this from the Situation Room as far as we know, and no update directly from White House officials. But something I did want to point out, Tom, is that several hours before this attack unfolded, the U.S. Embassy in Qatar had issued a shelter-in-place notice. Now, that raises the question, is it possible that the Qatari government in some way may have had advance notice of the attack? Let's be very clear. We do not know if that's the case, but it does raise the question if Iran may have notified some of the other countries in the region ahead of this attack. The White House is still monitoring the extent of this, whether there may be any injuries or the extent of the damage to any U.S. assets in the region. But it is curious that several hours before this attack unfolded, the U.S. Embassy in Qatar did already put out a shelter-in-place notice, so perhaps trying to minimize injuries, Tom.
8:30 at night in Qatar right now, 1:30 here in the East Coast. I do want to go back to Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, who is live for us in Tel Aviv. Richard, I know you have new reporting out of Qatar, but also after that, update our viewers about what's happening in Israel right now and if anything has happened there tonight.
So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar just put out a statement calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities by all parties and a return to the negotiating table. So they would like to see this over. They want all parties to stop and to resume a diplomatic process. But you asked about Israel. Israel just overnight has begun to change what it is targeting in Iran. There was an Israeli strike confirmed by the Ministry of Defense here that Israel struck the Evin prison in Tehran. Israel's attacking what it describes as tools of Iranian repression. They also targeted the Basij offices and headquarters. Now, the Basij are a military force that the Iranian government, the Iranian theocracy, has used for domestic repression. So when you take them together, they also attacked a police headquarters. They are taking away the Iran's ability to maintain law and order at home. And that is a different kind of attack. You're not just attacking their ability to project power, their missile sites. Israel is still doing that as well on a daily basis, attacking their missiles, missile launchers, aircraft, helicopters. Israel also this morning attacking the entry route to the Fordow military facility. But different this time, attacking the domestic agencies that keep the regime in power.
Richard, you know, we've been able to get sort of a snapshot of Iran's modern military strategy, if you will, over the last year, going back to that drone strike there in Israel, and then the statements that came out after that. Seeing tonight what's happened so far, Richard, seeing what Iran has put out so far, what sort of are you reading from the tea leaves? And again, this is combat. It could change at any moment, but what are you seeing tonight?
This seems to be a relatively limited response by Iran. It seems to be a response that Iran would have known would be largely unsuccessful. It is firing at a very hard target, one of the hardest targets in the Middle East, something that is far away from other civilian centers. The Iranians going out of their way to say that they didn't target the people of the brotherly nation of Qatar. They just fired on the Americans. They made a direct parallel to what the Americans did to Iran, saying that they fired the same number of missiles that the U.S. fired at the nuclear facilities at the Al-Udeid base. There are reports of sirens. Bahrain, they did have sirens that went off. There are reports of other bases on high alert. But we only know at this stage of Al-Udeid coming under a direct attack. But when you look at it, it does seem like this was a response that Iran would probably know would be unsuccessful, and it appears that it was unsuccessful. Now you have Qatar calling for a resumption of negotiations. But Iran obviously painting a very different picture to the domestic audience. The Iranian government has been humiliated. It is being disarmed by the day. There is no internet right now. People are in Iran. People are leaving the country. The supreme leader is reportedly in a bunker. He's cut himself off from electronic communications, has named a succession plan, appointing several others to take his place should he be killed. So this is a critical moment for the Iranians, and they did respond, but it looks like they responded in a way that would not necessarily, from their interpretation, cross too many red lines.
All right, Richard, stand by for us, because I know a lot of information is coming to us and filtering through you, so stand by for us there. I want to come back here to the U.S. and to Tom Winter, who's been monitoring, obviously, any threats to the homeland post the nuclear site strike. Tom, what are you hearing right now? I got to think it stands to reason that law enforcement all across this country, especially the FBI, monitoring what's happening overseas and this new Iranian strike.
100%, Tom. And while the FBI's priorities have shifted to immigration to help assist with the effort that is being undertaken by CBP and ICE in this country, this is still a top focus for them. The threat for Iran in the various joint terrorism task forces around the country, which are comprised not only of FBI agents, but from representatives from local and state police departments, are focused on this threat, particularly after those airstrikes on Saturday. So it's really threefold. One, they're particularly concerned about individuals that are angered or upset by what's going on in the Middle East, and that could be at Israel, that could be because of what's going on in the Gaza Strip, that could be because of what's going on in Iran. All of those issues could spark somebody to conduct an attack, and already we've seen that activity this year, just in the last month or so, the Molotov cocktail attack in Boulder, Colorado, against a group of Jewish individuals there, and so that's something that they are definitely worried about, and that's why you've seen patrol stepped up in New York City, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. at sensitive cultural sites, religious centers, and also diplomatic sites. So that's kind of the number one threat that they're thinking about. The second threat is this idea of some sort of a cyber attack by Iranian proxies, either in the U.S. or abroad. That's something that could look like the temporary taking down of a website or defacing, kind of a digital graffiti, Tom. That's something that they're looking into and seeing whether or not Iran wants to go down that path. And that's just based on experience in their proportional responses in the past. And then the third thing is this idea of sleeper cells. And as we first reported on NBC Nightly News last night, this idea that Iran told through an intermediary, the White House and the president, that, look, if you come after us, we're going to unleash sleeper cells in the United States. A couple of things about that. Iran is using kind of its most cost-effective threat mechanism to deliver a message to the president of the United States. Talk is quite cheap. The question is whether or not they have anybody here. There have been concerns over the last 8 to 10 years, given the southern border, individuals that have come in that have later been found on terrorism watch lists, or people that have then been wanted for questioning because of their ties overseas once they've been in the country. So that's always a concern. That's always a possibility. The second thing on that is that the Iranians over the years have tried to carry out attacks, as Jeremy Bash referred to, on U.S. soil, the targeting twice of an Iranian journalist and activist here in New York City, leading to arrests and convictions. There was a case involving an individual who was charged and convicted and is in jail in the United States, 10 years or so left on their prison sentence, Alexei Saab. That's somebody who conducted surveillance in Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C., including at Rockefeller Center, where our office are kind of scouting out potential opportunities for attacks. He's somebody who traveled to Lebanon and spent some time with Hezbollah. There was also a threat just in the last 9 months against then-President-elect Trump, now obviously the President of the United States, by several individuals who were coordinating with a person who's been charged and based in Iran. So that's just a sample of some of the plots that have been uncovered in the past. But of course, as I mentioned, we know about them because there's been arrests and prosecutions. So U.S. law enforcement is acutely aware of this threat. There's obviously always the potential that you don't know who's here, you don't know who could be in communication, but given what our colleague Richard Engel has been reporting as far as the lack of communication from Iran, the awareness by U.S. law enforcement, they think at the moment that they have a good handle on it, with the caveat, of course, that they know that they need to keep looking. And one other thing that I'll mention, we talked about Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, all the entities that they have sent up, kind of the tentacles. Those have been severely damaged over the last couple of years, particularly by Israel, the taking out really of Hezbollah, which everybody feared that if this day came where the U.S. had to interdict in Iran against the nuclear program, or that Israel did, that Hezbollah would launch attacks against Israel, U.S. interests overseas, and then that would be perhaps a nexus or a command and control point for any sort of operation here in the United States. They have been decimated by actions undertaken by the Israeli government. And so that has, in the eyes of U.S. officials, potentially weakened that threat, or at least Hezbollah's ability to operate here in the United States. So I don't think anybody is sitting on their hands. I know everybody's been focused on this. My phone has been ringing nonstop since Saturday night. Officials here continuing briefings on the matter. But at the moment, I think their biggest concern here in the U.S. is the idea that somebody could be angered by the entirety of the events that we've been talking about here this afternoon across the Middle East, and that would be a call to action. So that's really kind of the overlay, if you will, of what's going on here in the United States.
Tom Winchell, we thank you. If you are just joining our coverage right now, we have been following the breaking news over the last hour. Iran and its retaliatory strikes on a U.S. airbase in Qatar. From what we understand so far, Iran has launched several missiles at that airbase, but they have been intercepted by Qatari forces or by the U.S. forces as well. We understand that the airspace has been closed there, along with the UAE and Bahrain. Bahrain also sending off air sirens as well, but it's unclear if anything has happened in that country. We have several reporters in the region that have been following this in real time, along with our teams at the White House, spread out across Washington and the Pentagon as well. I do want to go back to Keir Simmons, who is in Erbil, Iraq. And Keir, I know you have some new reporting about what has and has not happened there in Iraq, not too far from Iran.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. I just managed to reach a senior official in Baghdad to ask him whether the U.S. base in Anbar province here in Iraq, to the west of Iraq, whether that base has been targeted. I'll just mention, and we have been mentioning, Tom, of course, there's another U.S. base behind me there. You can see the lights blinking in the distance. Now, I am told by that official in Baghdad that they have not seen any indication of an attack on Iraq by the Iranians. Nothing happening there, he told me, not that we see. So just add to that, senior Gulf diplomat who tells me that Bahrain has not seen any kind of a strike there. Then add to that, of course, the news from the Qataris that they have intercepted the missiles that were fired at the U.S. base there in Qatar. Of course, I just mentioned, going back to Bahrain, the 5th Fleet base there, Tom, so it would be a potential target. So far, has not been struck. That doesn't mean there weren't missiles fired at these countries, simply that no missiles have had any impact, according to the diplomats and officials who I'm speaking to across the region. Another Gulf diplomat telling me that Saudi Arabia has not seen any strikes against it, and that diplomat confirming their understanding that at this stage it is uniquely Qatar that has been targeted. But the evening is still, what are we, about an hour ago that this began, Tom? You know, that there's still time through the evening to see what we get from the Iranians.
Okay, Keir Simmons, stand by for us. Let's take this video full if we can, if I can ask the control room, because the night skies in Qatar were lit up with missiles and, of course, with anti-defense, air defense forces launching counteroffensive to those missiles coming in to Doha tonight, in scenes reminiscent of what we've seen in Tehran and Tel Aviv, where the night sky lights up with various missiles. But so far, we have no reports of any deaths. We have no reports of any injuries, and we have no reports even of any damage. It is still early, but Richard Engel, I want to go back to you. What does that tell us about this retaliatory strike from Iran?
Well, at this stage, it looks like it was a symbolic kind of strike, with Iran making a lot of noise about it, bragging about it, making a lot of statements, but attacking a target that is very well defended, isolated, trying to calibrate their response. The New York Times is reporting just now, citing 3 officials in Iran, that Qatar was informed ahead of time and that this was a symbolic attack. And Iran has done this in the past. When Iran carried out its missile strikes against Israel about a year ago now, they telegraphed what they were doing because they did not want to escalate it further than they believed they needed to. So when they launched drones against Israel, they told the world they were announcing drones. They told the world and the Israelis how the drones were coming to the country, their flight path, that they would be followed up by different weapon systems, missiles. So the Iranians initially telegraphed their operations. No, we don't have confirmation that they telegraphed them in this case, but the kind of strike, the target that was chosen, the fact that nothing got through, the fact that the Qataris had advance warning to close their airspace, that American and British nationals had already been told to shelter in place and were already taking precautions on the base and for the civilians in the country, indicates that they had some advanced knowledge, advanced intelligence, and that they were able to successfully stop what I think you can fairly easily describe as a symbolic response.
We'll keep watching what's happening there from Israel. I want to go back to Lieutenant General Barry McCaffrey. Barry, if we talk about sort of military planning and strategy here, right? The U.S. had quite the plan to attack Iran, the diversion with the B-2 bombers, then going straight, heading east, going straight for those nuclear sites. Even though Iran has sort of telegraphed what they've done, possibly putting out statements to signal maybe tonight is over, U.S. forces around the world still have to be very, very cautious.
Well, no question. We can only hope that the strike that Richard accurately described so far is largely symbolic. If it really was only 6 missiles, if they were all intercepted and knocked down, if Iran is claiming that this was an equivalent response to the U.S. strikes on their nuclear facilities, then this may be a prelude to a road to negotiations starting up and getting arms control inspectors on the ground again. We won't know. But I think it's important also to make the point, these U.S. forces in the region, whether in Iraq and Syria, Bahrain, Kuwait, Al-Udeid, they're there as a fighting combat force. They're not hostages. They're there to put Iran at risk and terrorist organizations at risk and to protect U.S. national security interests. So we shouldn't view them as, if we wanted to only protect U.S. military forces as a major national objective, we take them out of the Gulf. But they're pretty competent. They're tough. The Navy's at sea with 20,000 sailors and 2 carrier battle groups. So there's a big hammer out in the Gulf right now.
All right, Barry, we thank you for that. Stand by for us. I'm going to go back to Gabe Gutierrez, who's monitoring everything from the White House. Gabe, give us a sense of what's happening there in the building just behind you, the White House, and possibly inside the Situation Room.
Well, Tom, yes, the president is in the Situation Room right now. We understand from White House officials with his Secretary of Defense and the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, along with other national security officials. Now, we have not heard over the last few moments about the latest here, but certainly the president taking in what is happening, potentially speaking with partners in the region, trying to assess the full extent of the damage here, or if they've managed to escape any severe damage, kind of what happens next. You were mentioning with Richard and with General McCaffrey, if this was a largely symbolic attack, and again, we don't know the full extent of this yet, but if it were to have an attack with no injuries and no significant damage to any U.S. assets
Gabe,
in the region, Tom, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah, Gabe, thanks. We have some breaking news just coming in. Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon has some new reporting. Courtney, what can you tell our viewers?
Yeah, we are still working on confirmation about the possibility that the U.S., the base where U.S. personnel are housed at Al-Udeid in Qatar was, in fact, the subject of an attack by short and medium range missiles. We are still working through this, Tom. If you just give me a couple more minutes,
yeah, no, I
come back to me. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. They told me to come over to you, but I appreciate it.
That was my fault.
We want to make sure we want to make sure we're right. So keep working your sources. We appreciate that. We're not going to touch that reporting until we have it confirmed. Gabe, I'm going to go back to you. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but we are getting a lot of information, as you know, in real time, and we want to make sure the information we're bringing our viewers is absolutely correct. You were talking about the president monitoring this, and I also want to ask you, the vice president and Marco Rubio as well, the Secretary of State, going out there and making it very clear they don't want a war with Iran. And the vice president even said this, they have a war with Iran's nuclear program, essentially saying maybe they don't want any more of this fight. They've done what they wanted to do, but also threatening Iran to be careful if they retaliated.
Yeah, certainly. And look, it's highly unlikely and actually almost impossible for Iran to get that same message, at least for their domestic audience. They see it as the U.S. at war with Iran. But you're right. Administration officials have been very clear and reiterated over the last 48 hours or so, or less than that, that the U.S. is at war with Iran's nuclear program. The president himself, though, in his social media post late last evening, floating the idea of regime change, seemed to suggest that maybe that wasn't the full extent of the U.S.'s ambitions. But this morning, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that there was no change in military posture, that the focus of any campaign by the U.S. in Iran would be focused on Iranian nuclear capabilities. But as we watch this, Tom, another question will be, how long will the president be in the Situation Room monitoring this? We were expecting him to meet with his national security staff in the Oval Office. Unclear if perhaps that meeting could have opened up to press. That sometimes tends to happen when the president meets with officials in the Oval Office. We have not heard from him on camera since late Saturday evening. But the latest here from the White House, Tom, the president monitoring the situation with top national security officials in the Situation Room.
Gabe, I thank you for that. I think we are ready. Our reporting is ready as well. We're going to go back to Courtney Kuby now, who has been working her sources, so plugged in there at the Pentagon. Courtney, what can you tell our viewers now?
Yeah, Tom, I'm sorry. It is developing very quickly here. So we now have, according to 2 U.S. officials, that in fact Iran did fire short and medium range missiles at Al-Udeid. They were shot down by air defense systems. There are no reports of any casualties at this point. The officials telling us that attack has ended. The reason that I'm saying there were no reports of any casualties at this point is, remember what happened after the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani in Iraq. Iran retaliated with a number of ballistic missiles fired at at Al-Assad, a base in western Iraq that houses U.S. troops. And while in the immediate aftermath of those missiles being fired, and remember, in that case, they actually did impact the base. There were initially no reports of major casualties, but then as time developed, there were a number of service members and even civilians who developed cases of traumatic brain injury and other sort of concussive blasts. Now, at this point, again, no casualties, no injuries reported. The belief is that all of these missiles were in fact intercepted. There was no impact. We are asking about sort of the next steps here, of course, and that is, remember, when you shoot down a missile, there can be debris that can fall to the ground if there's anything that was impacted by possible debris falling to the ground, and we're still working on some of the specifics about those short and medium range missiles, specifically how many were fired and exactly how close any of them actually got to Al-Udeid. Again, this is developing very quickly, but U.S. officials now, in fact, confirming that Al-Udeid, the base housing up to 5,000 Americans in Qatar, was targeted tonight by Iranian missiles. Now, remember, we've reported that we've been talking about this over the last several days, but as the tensions increased between Israel and Iran, as they continued to trade fire back and forth, and as the U.S. started talking about the possibility of the military strikes that occurred in Iran over the weekend, the U.S. took some mitigating measures to try to protect Americans and assets from the possibility of this sort of a strike by Iran. That included moving some aircraft out and some personnel. But we do not have indications that the base was fully evacuated in advance of this attack, Tom.
And then, Courtney, you know, the Trump administration has been very clear that they don't want a long-term war with Iran, right? But what are you hearing from inside the Pentagon? Is it still just too early to know if there is another strike from the U.S.? I mean, we're still sort of getting all the information in from this retaliatory strike, but with no injuries so far, no casualties that we know of, and we're waiting on if there's even any damage so far. Does the U.S. have to flex any muscle in retaliation to this kind of strike?
Yeah, I imagine that the U.S. going into the strikes in Iran over the weekend had a number of plans in place for what they could do if, in fact, Iran retaliated, and sort of the levels of retaliation, right? So there's what we're seeing right now, which is an attack on, at this point, one installation with the U.S. in the region. It seems at this point it was unsuccessful. Officials again telling us that at this point it is over. But if there hasn't been damage, if there have not been casualties, is it possible that the U.S. is not going to respond? Again, I point back to after the Qasem Soleimani death, after the U.S. took out Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, Iran retaliated. You know, there can be these back and forths, but they sort of can also fizzle out if, in fact, there's no deaths incurred or no infrastructure. But I imagine that is the top topic of conversation right now in that Situation Room and among defense officials. And no matter what, I imagine that they are presenting options to President Trump as we speak, or drawing up new options should he decide that he wants to respond back to what is at this point, appears to be retaliation by Iran for the U.S. military strikes in Iran over the weekend.
All right, Courtney, you stand by for us. When you get any new reporting, we will come right back to you. I'm going to go back to Richard Engel, who's reporting from Tel Aviv tonight. He's been covering all the developments that have happened between Israel and Iran, and now, of course, the U.S. and Iran. Richard, we can confirm from U.S. officials short and medium-range missiles were fired from Iran, pointed and targeting the Al-Udeid U.S. base there in Qatar. But they're saying that each of those missiles was intercepted in the air from those air defense systems. It looks like at this point, from what we've heard, it's still very early. No injuries, no casualties so far on the U.S. side.
We're hearing that now from the Pentagon. We're hearing that now from officials in Qatar. And most critically, both sides are saying that it appears to be over. That is a fundamental part of all of this. Iran got a response. They fired on a military target, not close to civilians in Qatar. The attack shot down U.S. military bases, had already been on high alert, and Qatar in particular had been on high alert with the airspace closed shortly before this attack, and American and British citizens told to shelter in place. So they were prepared for something. It is over. It seems that there are no casualties, according to both the Qataris and the Pentagon. And as you were talking earlier to General Barry McCaffrey, who's been in these situations before as a four-star retired American general, these troops are not there as sitting ducks. They are not hostages. They are there to be CENTCOM's forward operating position. They are there to carry out strikes against Iran. And Iran is saying it responded in a legitimate way, and perhaps this could open up a door for negotiations. That is what Qatar says it would like to see. Now we will see if President Trump agrees.
Richard Engel reporting for us from Tel Aviv tonight. Richard, we thank you. I'm going to go back to Gabe Gutierrez to check in with the White House, and as the president monitors all of this. Gabe, as you reported, one of the first things you reported, we were expecting to hear from the president at some point today, possibly. Do we think the schedule has changed? Do you think he'll make any type of statements about what's just occurred tonight overseas in Qatar?
Well, that remains to be seen, Tom. Certainly, the president, not shy in front of cameras, likes to address the American public when he can in these types of situations. Now, what we had been expecting earlier today was a national security meeting in the Oval Office that had not been opened up to press. But as sometimes is the case in those situations, the president does bring cameras in. Right now, we are trying to reach White House officials to see if there has been any change to the schedule. We have no indication of that yet. As far as we know, the president and his top national security staff are still in the Situation Room monitoring all this. But picking up on where Richard left off, if there was an attack where the missiles were intercepted, no U.S. casualties, certainly that will be seen as very good news from the White House. And then probably what they're also discussing now is what, if anything, will they do to retaliate, or will this perhaps be an opening for some sort of peace talks with the Iranian government, something that the White House had been calling for, but seemed increasingly unlikely in the aftermath of those U.S. airstrikes in Iran. So again, the latest here from the White House, Tom, we have not received word if the president plans to address the American people. As far as we know, he is still in the Situation Room monitoring all this with his national security staff.
All right, our Gabe Gutierrez reporting from the White House. If you've been tuning in, we have been following the developments out of Iran and Qatar. Iran launching a retaliation strike over the U.S.'s strike on their nuclear sites over the weekend. From what we know right now from two U.S. officials, the Al-Udeid base there in Qatar was targeted as the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. Up to 5,000 American service members working there, civilians and soldiers alike, all members of the U.S. forces there. From what we're hearing from the U.S. officials, short-range and medium-range missiles were fired at the base, but they were intercepted by air defense systems. So far, no reports of any casualties. So far, no reports of any injuries. Iran has put out statements through their state media alerting their own people that this attack has happened. But so far after that, no other missiles have been launched. Bahrain and the UAE also closing their airspace. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report, but we are going to be back as events warrant. We'll have much more ahead on our streaming network right now, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com. We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.